the Water and Creatives podcast. I'm your host, Allie, and joining me today is Raleigh artist Jackie Saunders. And I am so excited to have you on the podcast. So thank you so much for being on.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to just dive in and talk with another artist. I feel like it's definitely a topic where artists can talk with other artists for hours and hours. So
yeah. And your artwork is so, I find it like really, really interesting and just, I don't know, it really like tickles that happy part of my brain. I don't know why, but I cannot wait. I cannot wait to really kind of jump in and talk about your artwork and what inspires you and how you've built like a really awesome business around your artwork.
Yeah, thank you. I love it. I definitely want to just like inspire other people, bring like colorful designs out into the world, and especially connecting with other artists like yourself. It's definitely a huge part of why I do what I do, why I'm an artist, is to connect with other artists too. So I'm so glad that we were able to connect through it.
Absolutely. Yes. And you, like I said, you've really built an awesome community around artwork, not only artists, but you are also the co-host of the Level Up Artist podcast, and you're a creative mentor with the Level Up Artist program, which you founded with fellow artist Adriana May. So that's wildly impressive. Like you've done so much, and it's amazing. Like it truly is.
Thank you. Yeah, that was definitely one thing. I mean, going back a little bit, I started making artwork more formally in college. And so I did the very traditional route of studying art, went to school, got my BFA, got a BA in art history, even got like my master's in museum studies, was like full on, like I love art, but I've always thought of it from the business lens. Like for a while, I thought I was going to do more of the behind the scenes of the artwork, like being a curator or an exhibition designer at a museum. So always understood the business side of it. But then after moving to Raleigh and having multiple day jobs that I was juggling, really realizing that I wanted to dive back into my artwork again. And so that's really what got me started in my second wave of my creative career, as I call it. And really diving into like, what does this practice look like when you're balancing a day job? What does it look like in the 21st century, where yes, I absolutely loved my undergrad. It was great in terms of like learning art history and art style, but like you don't have classes on Instagram. You don't have classes on how to send out a newsletter to your collectors, how to build relationships with collectors. And these, I feel, are all things that as any business owner, and especially a small business owner, especially creatives, where so much of ourselves is poured into our work, people want to hear about those stories. They want to get to know you. But I was like, well, they didn't teach you any of this in art school. If I wanted to know that, I should have probably gone to business school or went to school for marketing. And so that's really when I met Adriana. We both connected as artists through an artist critique group in person. And then really with COVID shut down, we became each other's like lifelines from a creative standpoint. We'd have like weekly phone calls. It was like every Monday I would get back from my day job and I would go on these long walks that I was like, okay, we're going to talk like an hour about artwork stuff. It would end up turning into like an 8-mile walk for like 4 hours. Hey, have you read this book? Have you heard of this podcast? What are you doing for this question? And so that's kind of how our podcast started. Once we had both have public facing studios in downtown Raleigh at Art Space, where members of the public can come to our studio and look at our artwork, see the creative process, and also meet us. We really want to say, okay, we have all these artists coming to visit us that have very similar questions from the business side of it, because again, that's something that's not really talked about. And even as someone who has the traditional academia background, I was still even having these questions. And so I was like, don't worry. Like I did the 6-hour deep dive on what newsletter platform is best for artists. Like I've troubleshooted 3 months, the worst ways to do this marketing technique. And this is how I found is the most successful. let me save you 3 months of wasting your time and just show you how to do it. Because that's definitely just the attitude we both have of like, we just want to share forward all of the information that other people have shared with us and also that we've learned to save other creatives time and also just connect with them on their journey, no matter where they are. So it's been so amazing having the Level Up Artist podcast and then also our private membership online where we show you a behind the scenes of exact contract templates and how to price your work. Here's the spreadsheets and formulas that we use. Here's the formulas that other artists use. So it's not just talking about the topics like we do on the podcast. It's actually showing you it in the membership. And it's been super, super amazing, like a whole nother layer to the role of being an artist, which is so fun.
Oh, that's so amazing. And it's it's definitely an area that artists need help in. Like it really is. When you talk to a lot of artists like that, like the business side of it is definitely an area that we struggle with.
And it's super intimidating too. And it's like, it's one of those things for me, especially, I feel like I was very fortunate with my upbringing. Both of my parents have always been so supportive of my creativity, almost like annoyingly supportive, as I say it, where, but they both have such different backgrounds. And I feel like I've been able to really pull from both of those. So they own an architecture business together. My dad is the licensed architect, so very the creative mind, likes to get into the studio early in the morning to do his hand drawings. He still does everything by hand, very old school craftsman. But then my mom worked in sales. And so when they got married, she took over the admin side, the networking side, the business plan, the finances. Like, so really being able to balance both of those things and growing up observing how important both of those things are in the creative process, because architecture is obviously a little bit different than the fine art world, but the idea of, okay, tracking your time on a project. Okay, we're over budget, we're under budget, like contracts. Obviously the details of it are different, but understanding early on the importance of all of those things, in addition to the artwork itself, has been super, super rewarding.
Man, I'm just listening to you talk and I'm like, yes, things I should be doing, but I'm not.
That's the thing of like, we all have something that we can be better at, right? Like I'm still trying to convince myself that one day I'll hit that feeling of like, wow, I have everything under control. I'm not dropping the ball anywhere. Like, and realistically, that's just not going to happen. It's kind of like an ebbs and flows. If you have like super into the creative process, maybe updating these admin things are low, or okay, I'm good at these two things, but I haven't posted on social media in like 2 months. So it's always like this huge like pendulum, because we only have so much time, we only have so many resources. And so it's really just about balancing it in a sustainable way too. And that's one thing that I have found is super important, and that we talk about on the podcast and in our membership a lot too. It's not just, here's a million more things to put on your to-do list that you know you should be doing, but it's one of those, what's something that's sustainable? Because
so important.
We've all felt burnout. We've all felt that time where you're like, I know I should be, but you try to push through the burnout and it ends up taking even longer to recover. So figuring out what's sustainable for you, and that looks different for everyone, and that's okay.
Oh. So important. Yeah. I'm just like sitting here and I'm like, oh yeah, lists of things should be doing, but I was on today's episode, what we really wanted to talk about was kind of your artistic journey and what inspires your artwork. And we will also be doing an episode with you and Adriana to talk specifically more about Level Up Artists and the program, and really get into kind of like what the business side of art is kind of all about. So I'm really excited to have you both on to talk more about the Level Up Artists program and your podcast, which people can listen to now. So if you have business questions about, being an artist, or if you are an artist and you need to know more, you can listen to the Level Up Artist podcast and kind of get a preview of what y'all work on in the
Because
actual
clearly I
program.
could talk about it all day.
I know. I was like, oh, we could just go on about this. Yeah. Yeah. But I will have you both on for another episode so we could actually like get into the business stuff and into Level Up Artists a bit more. But today I want to focus on Jackie and your artwork, because it is, like I said, it's reminds me a lot of like stained glass almost a little bit. And it's just really, I don't know, it's a really interesting combination of like geometric artwork and color and lines. And like I said, it just kind of like hits that happy spot in my brain. I really love it. And yeah, it's, I don't know, it makes me happy.
Thank you. Yeah, it's definitely been, obviously, as a small business owner of an art business, I am also an artist myself. And so really focusing on that artwork, I feel like my style has always lended towards geometric. Honestly, even as young as like middle school, I can remember like my version of like doodling on homework was like drawing geometric lines. Like it's just always how I've sketched. And I think, I'm sure my parents' architecture influence has something to do with it. Like, yes, I had coloring books and blank pages, but I also had like a T-square and a ruler. And I would just like sketch with Prismacolor on the drafting table, like next to all these licensed architects. And so definitely having that had a bit of an influence, even just I'm sure like visiting different cities, looking at the angles of buildings and the way windows are constructed. I always loved Frank Lloyd Wright homes. And I think that especially has been a huge influence of my fascination with really light and shadow and color. Those are an inevitable theme in all of my work. I also like working in kind of like a lot of different series, as many artists do. We like having not necessarily shiny object syndrome where we're all over the place, but I like having various types of projects that, okay, once you feel either exhausted or stumped in one aspect, you can kind of jump to the other. And so a lot of the designs that you're referencing, part of my color catcher collection, were definitely inspired by stained glass. And so I've always loved stained glass, like I said, like Frank Lloyd Wright designs. But as a student or as a young professional still renting apartments, I know I was going to be moving multiple times in the past few years. So I was like, I didn't really necessarily want to, understandably, stained glass is a very labor intensive, high craftsmanship required skill to create these designs. It takes a lot of time. And so understandably, they're appropriately priced very high, because as artists to other artists, like artists deserve to be paid for their work. And so understanding all those things, I'm like, I love stained glass, but I would want a larger piece. And realistically, I wasn't able to afford that right away. Or I didn't want to like accidentally break in a move and then feel like this investment wasn't worth it. So I was like, well, what if I could create like a lightweight and durable alternative to stained glass? It's definitely not the same. There are aspects of glass that are simply beautiful for what it is. You can't necessarily recreate it, but creating an alternative to it so that you didn't have to wait to make this big investment, to have a substantial piece of artwork that you could hang in your window and really have the beauty of the light from the outside come into your home. And so that's where the Color Catcher series was invented. And so if any of your podcast listeners are on Instagram and want to follow me, I probably will have posted pictures of them recently. My handle is @JSandersStudio, so they can look at my pictures while they're listening to this podcast. Unless they're driving, then wait.
Right. Safety first, guys. Safety first. The Color Catcher series it's definitely one that caught my eye because it's such a great way to brighten an area. And
right.
I don't know. It's just so pretty.
Thank you. Yeah. And especially being like, I always thought about the idea of using like light within my work. Like in the past, I've also tried to incorporate like light and mirrors that almost were like sculptures. There was a series that I made in college, but I'm also not a very big technology savvy person. I fake it very well for certain things, or like I'm a very systems oriented process, but I need an exact systems and procedures list of step 1, do this, step 2, do this. So like troubleshooting technology, please someone take my money. I don't know how to do it. Like, so I was like, well, there's this huge light source outside called the sun that you don't have to figure out how to troubleshoot. Some days it may be brighter than others. It's always going to show up. It might be more dull, but that's really when my first fascination with incorporating light into my work, the sun as a light source, started. And it really inspired my latest painting series that I've been super, super excited about. It's very new. I just started it in 2022, but it's definitely kind of embracing the energy of the sunrise, because kind of opposite from other creatives too. I'm definitely a morning person. I feel like I've, out of forced habit, trained myself to be, because when I was getting back into my creative practice as an adult with a day job, I really realized that like once I went to my job, my time wasn't my own anymore, which is understandable. You exchange your time for deliverables and they pay you for what you're doing. But there would be some days where I work 8 hours. There'd be some days where I work 12 hours. There'd be some days I work 16. Like if we had a job that came in, I was in a very production heavy position. And so I'm like, if a job comes in an hour before we close and the boss asked you to stay, you got to stay. So really understanding that, okay, if I wanted to prioritize my artwork again, I have to do it in the morning before I go to work, because once I go to work, your guess is as good as mine when I'll be able to get back. And I kind of didn't want my creative practice to also be influenced by whatever happened during the day. And I felt like from an energy standpoint, I'm not a super like woo-woo type person, but I feel like as artists, you have to be like aware of like your creative energy, when it feels right, when it feels forced. And I was like, when I first wake up, that calm before the sun rises, before it feels like anyone in the world, it feels like everyone's asleep. And like you're the only one awake in your studio, in your second bedroom that you turn into an art studio, even just at your kitchen table, like you can completely focus, or at least that's how it is for me. And so I kind of trained myself to have that creative energy in the morning out of necessity when I had my old day job. And now it's just kind of stuck that way. So even having a studio in downtown Raleigh, this new series is all about the sunrise and embracing the energy of the sunrise before the day actually begins. So all of the paintings are done between 4 and 7 a.m. And so it's about that time. It's about that stillness, that like raw, authentic human energy before the emails come in, before, even if I'm not looking at technology, looking at the laptop, looking at my email, you're still kind of aware that it's going on. You feel the energy shift of like everyone else is awake, traffic might be increasing a bit, but no one plans anything for 5 a.m. Only crazy people like do that. So like, there's nothing else that I should be doing right now other than maybe sleeping, but like, there's no expectations of me at that time. So I can be fully present, fully in this work. And I'm super, super excited about it.
Ooh, I cannot wait to see that. And I love that. Yeah, it's going to be, I'm really, cannot wait to see it, because I agree. There's that like stillness in the world at certain times. So I'm really interested to see kind of how you've captured that in your artwork. So that's exciting.
Thank you.
You had another series, I guess, or maybe, I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong, but there's one, I'm looking at, what you have behind you, which the listeners cannot see, but it's kind of like a combination of painting, I'm assuming, with line work of also paint, maybe, I don't know, but it's like, it's really interesting because it is kind of a combination of like abstract with geometric work on like layered with glass. And this is some of your other work that I absolutely love. Like I had to stop myself just from like buying everything in your shop because I love it all so much.
You're so sweet.
But like this is also, I find it's a really interesting kind of combination of styles, and it really reminded me of like architectural drawing. So when you said that your dad was kind of in that field, I was like, oh, okay, that might be where some of that comes from. But
that's so funny because and like most of my collectors too, especially of this series of paintings, a lot of them are either engineers or work in IT, which then I tell them my family owns an architecture firm. They're like, oh, that makes sense. And it really is like that combination of bold color, gestural marks with geometric sharp lines. And that layering is something that I've really been diving into the past probably 2 years now, because material wise, it is kind of the blend of multiple series that I do. I kind of see my work in like 3 different sections. So like the first are art products, or if you're thinking in business terms, like 3 different income streams as well, in terms of like products where they're definitely a more affordable price point for most people. I want it to be approachable for as many people as possible, but they are more like reproducible products. So different cards, the color catchers, things that hang in your window, pieces that can be in your day-to-day life. And then on the opposite spectrum, I have large scale original artwork paintings, which this new Sunrise series, it's every single thing is done by hand. Again, it's also the layering of gestural marks with geometric lines. And the pieces that you're referring to are kind of a combination of both of those, to where they actually become like sculptures themselves. So really incorporating light and shadow. And they're what I call my shadow painting series, because conceptually, like I was saying, I like the idea of kind of blending opposing elements. So both raw human energy that happens before the sunrise, but also understanding that from a human existence standpoint in the modern world, like technology and structure and planning are required. Like we are forward-thinking creatures. And so there has to be some level of structure almost like imposed onto that completely present, completely human authenticity aspect. And so that's been the concept I've really been exploring a lot, even if sometimes I have abstract gestural paintings that I like just on their own. I feel like there's this inevitable tie, like you have to have some layer of the modern world imposing onto the painting, if that makes sense.
Oh my God. Yeah. I'm like, really, I love how you explained all of that. Like and also I'm not a morning person, but you're kind of like inspiring me. I'm like, shit, maybe I should get up at 4 to 7, like do some art.
That's honestly one of my favorite things, especially if your followers do follow me on Instagram. You'll see like a lot of sunrise montages, me like pouring my coffee at 4 a.m. So it's one of my favorite things when people like tag me in their sunrise pictures or even sunset pictures of just like them being present and recognizing the beauty during that time. And really that it's almost like that shift in energy, whether it's the morning shift or the evening shift. I mean, there's night owl energy too, where I feel like a lot of the people that I talk to that are more night owls, they kind of equate that to like that energy that you find from like 11 p.m. to like 2 or 3. Where like no one else is up, or it feels like it. It's just a calmness. You can focus on whatever you're doing. It's that same kind of energy, just a few hours shifted. But understanding that balance of our human existence and balancing like the chaos with the structure, the super colorful gestural marks with the rigid geometric lines, and understanding the push and pull between those and how they're just inevitably linked in a way, which is so much fun to explore.
I'm just like, yeah, cool, man. Like, I don't know, listening to you talk about your artwork is just, it's, I don't know, it's great. I love it. I love the way that you explain it with the chaos and structure and because that is human nature. So I'm on board with it. I wanted to get into a little bit about your process, because we've kind of touched on it a little. Kind of what inspires you is kind of those quiet moments and sunlight and shadow and lines and like you said, chaos, but also structure to that chaos. When you are inspired by something, or you get idea, what's your process for how you're going to actualize it? Like, do you sit down and like plan out kind of like every step of what you're creating, or do you kind of just let the creativity go?
Yeah, I would say I definitely rely heavily on like, I need to get things out of my brain. I have found in the past, I'm like, oh yeah, like I'll definitely remember that amazing idea when I get back to the studio later. And then you go and sit down and you're like, what am I supposed to do? I don't know. So it's definitely kind of like capturing the muse or the idea of energy as soon as it comes to you. And so journaling is a huge part of my work. As you can tell, I'm very conceptual with the art that I make, which again, I've always kind of been that way. I love abstract artwork simply for if someone's like, hey, that looks super cool. I don't know what it's about, but I have a connection to it. Great. Like sometimes the viewer wants to know the audience or the artist's original intention. Sometimes they don't. And either way is fine with me, because I feel like as soon as I make a piece of artwork, it doesn't belong to me anymore. It belongs to the person that's meant to own it and that's meant to have it in their life. So yeah, some people want to know the concept, some people don't. But for me, I always have very strong concepts behind my work, different stories, different ideas. It might be a phrase, it might be a complete thought out story. But so writing is a huge part of my process, and drawings as well. I don't always have full sketches of what the drawings are going to be, especially when it comes to the geometric lines. Those are typically patterns that I'll at least get like 50 to 75% there through a sketch. And that actually started back in 2020. I did a daily drawing series. So that was right when I was getting back into my creative process. I was really starting 2019, but I'd like do it for a few days. Then I'd like not do anything for like 2 weeks. And then maybe I have one good session and then like nothing really for another month. And so for me, I was like, okay, being a goals-oriented person, a very structured person, I'm like, I need something that is, again, sustainable, not go a million miles an hour with my goals, which I tend to do, not be like, okay, I have to draw for 4 hours every single day. Like that's not sustainable. So what I decided to do was just one drawing on an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper. I like dot grid paper personally. And then I also sketch with Sharpie. So I have normal size Sharpie and then the thin. I like the boldness of the line, but basically what I committed to was one drawing every single day for all of 2020. So that was a wild year to document. Some sketches were more journal entry like with small doodles. Some were full-on design compositions that turned into pieces later. Some are still waiting to be brought to life. But my whole thing was like, let's just document like this existence this day. And some days if I was like stressed out of my mind or working on another art project or whatever reason, I was like, you're going to get a circle. I did a drawing. Here you go. Today, I draw a lopsided circle. Like even though I'm using a stencil, it's still not even a perfect circle. But other days it turned into like a 2-hour session and I could really get into the flow of it. And so for me, it was just kind of like recommitting myself to the process. And that's definitely been something so I didn't do it in 2021. I'm doing it again in 2022. So wow. Maybe it's every other year type practice.
Yeah.
And I felt like that was definitely just a momentum builder in 2020, where by the end of the year, I was like, I had just so many ideas and physically not enough time to bring them all to life. And so then I was like, well, 2021, let me work with all these drawings. And then it's kind of like a refilling up the cup and then being able to make them. Yeah. So definitely documenting things with words and sketches is a huge part of like my day-to-day process. But then when I go into the studio, I really like that disconnecting time. I know there's so many tools that you can use with like iPad sketching, which I'm trying to get into, especially with geometric, or there's some artists that are fully digital and do Procreate and all of that. But for me and my process, it needs to be very out of technology because so much of my day-to-day and my day job is in digital marketing. So much of my life is on a screen. which I love being able to connect with people and use technology for what it's good for. But it's one of those when I'm in my creative process and in my flow, the whole point of me making artwork is to feel more human and to feel more like almost like primal of like, get messy with paint, disconnect and put on some music and then just be totally present in that moment, which is a lot of fun.
Well, and there's something to be said to be able to like physically hold and handle and like manipulate the things around you. So I'm the same way when it comes to journaling. Like I tried digital journals for a while and I was like, this is just not my jam. Like I like being able to hold the book in my hand and write in it. And so
I know I go back and forth with that too, with journaling being such a huge part. I'm like, the efficiency side of my brain is like, this would be so much more efficient if you just did it in a Word document and you could type it out and then it's searchable and you can put it into a blog or whatever. But it shifts my mindset. It shifts my energy versus like getting up, pouring some coffee, lighting a candle, have some light music on and just like being in that moment. Like the blue screen totally changes it. So
it does. It does.
Yeah.
Could not agree more. So first off, the drawing a day for a year is amazing. I think that is such a great idea. And like you said, you're kind of capturing all of this art in thoughts and vibes and feelings and everything for an entire year. And then that following year, you have the opportunity to kind of bring some of those to life, which is brilliant. And that's a really, really like interesting kind of exercise, I think, for folks to try. Like maybe if they're having like a creativity block or something.
Yeah.
And maybe not for a year to start with. They just try it for like a month or something.
Right. 30 days.
Yeah.
And that's the thing too. Like, I think you also have to realize as an artist, like what you're motivated by and what you get discouraged by. Like for some people, they need the structure of like, okay, like a time commitment, like no expectations on what you produce, but you have to be in this studio or sit in this chair for 20 minutes every day. Maybe you don't even have to produce anything, but like you can't do anything else. There was a comedian, that's where I think it was Jim Carrey, maybe, don't quote me on that, but he was saying, or maybe that's Seinfeld. He was saying he would do that with like his stand-up comedy, where it's like, it would be like an hour a day. Like he sit at his one window, look out, and like, sometimes he would completely be flowing with ideas and write like an entire stand-up routine. Other days he would literally sit there for the hour, sip his coffee. He's like, I can't be on my phone. I can't check email, just like sit in thoughts for that hour. So like sometimes there'd be nothing, but sometimes there's everything. It's like allowing that space for either one to be there, and that's okay. So I feel like as artists, either giving yourself the limitation of a certain amount of time that you can commit to realistically, or a certain type of product every day consistently that doesn't have the time shrink. Like there were some days that literally 25 seconds to write the date and like do the simplest drawing ever, call it good. And other days would be a 2-hour block, and just understanding what works best for you and your schedule and figuring out what is sustainable. So that would be my biggest tip.
It's sustainability, man. Don't burn yourself out. I think that's something else that like like everyone, it's kind of our culture, right? Just like go until you can't go anymore. But I think with creatives too, it's kind of like an ebb and flow type of system sometimes, where you're feeling really inspired and you're going, and then you crash and you don't go for a while. And then, so finding that like nice balance, I think would be quite beneficial.
100%. And that's one of the like, maybe it's a controversial opinion, I'm not sure, but I've always been a firm believer of like, do not set your goals when you feel motivated. Because when you are like in the flow and you're like, I just had the best painting session ever. I'm going to do this every day for the next 3 months. I'm going to block off 6 hours of time. And then, I mean, it's just like working out. Like I'm a huge athlete too. So there's a lot of like sports analogies or like workout analogies that I think of like, you can't just eat like 7 salads in one day and then say like, great, I hit my salads for the week. Like, that's not how it works.
Oh my God.
Like, it needs to be like you show up every day and it's a sustainable thing. Like, it's more beneficial to have like one extra vegetable every single day than to eat 7 salads every Sunday and think that that's the same. Like, that's not how our bodies work. Like, I'm done for the month. I hit my vegetable quota in one sitting.
Oh,
We're like, sometimes I feel like that's our relationship with like systems and structure. And so figuring out, okay, what is sustainable a little bit every single day, especially when it comes to, burning yourself out. It's so easy when like, to set big lofty goals. And then 3 days later, oh, I missed one painting session. Like, I'm a failure. What am I doing? Like, I should just quit. Like, all those self-doubt thoughts that we all have at every level, no matter where we are. So it's like, what can I do to setting your future self up for success is a big thing for me as well. So
smart. Such good. Like, it's such good advice. And it's funny because like, you can hear it like over and over again. Right. And you can tell yourself that and just be like, hey, like, pick one thing to accomplish today. And like, that's okay. Like, if you just doodle in your notebook for 20 minutes, like, great. Like, that is a win for you. But I think we're all kind of programmed to like go big or go home. Right. So we're like, oh, I only did 20 minutes in my journal today, man. Like, it's not good enough. And then you, like you're saying, like the self-doubt kicks in and like the negative talk, and then you just stop.
Right. And it's one of those, you kind of have to, I always try to put myself in the position of being at the end of that goal already, of like, yes, right now, okay, 20 minutes a day drawing. You're like, well, whoop-de-doo. Like, I'm the best artist ever. Look, I just did a 20-minute drawing. So what? But like, imagine that feeling of, okay, you drew for 20 minutes every day the past 6 months.
Yeah.
You're like, heck yeah, like, that's amazing. Like, oh, and that's how that momentum builds too with your creative process, or at least that's how it works for me. I'm just very like momentum driven, and like showing up every day in that side of your brain. It's like a muscle. Again, it's like working out. Like, you're continuously showing up, putting that effort in, where like it gets easier each time. And inevitably those days where you're really feeling in the flow will increase because your body's used to being in that routine and system.
It's like building a habit. You just got to keep doing it until it's just like a natural thing that you're jumping into.
Exactly. But especially making sure it's also something that's accessible no matter where you are. Like, kind of ridding your future self of excuses, which is another thing to think about. Like, what excuse will my future self make? Be like, oh, well, I'm traveling. I can't paint because I don't have this material, or like, I don't have this. So also not being so specific that like you set yourself up for failure is.
That's another good one. Cause I'm thinking about myself, and for me, I'd probably be like, well, I'm going to do this, like, I'm going to sketch every day for 6 months, but I'm only going to do it when I'm in the studio. Like, that's how I would do that. And I would use that as an excuse, because I know me. I'd be like, well, I'm not in the studio today, so I guess I'm just not going to do it.
Right. You're like, well, sorry, it doesn't count. I still didn't give it
that is an example of what not to do.
It's so funny what our brain does to like trick ourselves out of it.
It's, we just, got to work through that.
Love it.
I think we kind of, because I wanted to ask you kind of like advice for creatives that might be struggling to find inspiration, but I feel like we've kind of hit that with the, trying to do like a sketch a day, or setting some type of schedule for yourself almost to help you find that creative space, and also I think not forcing yourself to be creative. I think that's a big thing as well. So
that's really big. And that's one thing that I kind of wish I had heard sooner in my creative process, of really just like being aware of where your energy is and how can you, rather than having to like, I'm very much a planner, a scheduler. I think I've mentioned that multiple times in this, But if anyone knows me in person, like I have every day mapped out to like 15-minute increment blocks. Like, what am I doing? What am I focused on? The constant blocking of my time is like always in fluctuation, but also understanding that like your creativity sometimes can't always align with the schedule of your modern life, of your day job, of your social commitments, of XYZ, whatever other things define you as a person other than just being an artist. So you kind of have to, if you're looking to prioritize your creative practice in a sustainable way or grow it into a repeat, especially if you're looking to grow a business, but even just a commitment to yourself, if this is something I want to prioritize in my life, sometimes that kind of has to become a priority first from an energy schedule standpoint. So like, do you feel the most creative in the morning? Do you feel the most creative in the evening? And then like, what does that mean for everything else in your life? Not saying that you're like, well, I'm only creative in the afternoon, so I'm quitting my day job tomorrow and like hoping for the best. Wouldn't necessarily suggest that, but just being aware of where your energy is and how you can manage your own expectations on what you're quote unquote supposed to be doing.
Yeah. Oh, that's good. That's a good bit of advice because you can't force like, okay, every day at 3 p.m. I'm going to sit down and I'm going to be creative.
Right. And that's kind of going back to like the daily practice thing where you can somewhat train yourself, but in the beginning, like you can't have any expectations of yourself. Like not feeling the energy. If you start feeling energy, it might not be something that's quote unquote good, of just no expectations. This is what we're going to do. And then kind of having the momentum take you from there. And then if you find that after a few weeks, the momentum's still not hitting, all right, now let's switch it up, do something.
Great advice. What else? So you kind of mentioned you're currently working on a new series that's inspired by like stillness of early morning and sunlight, which again, I cannot wait to see. Is there anything else that you're working on or that you'd like to share with listeners?
Yeah. So I think that series is my big focus right now from an art making standpoint. Of course, you mentioned the Level Up Artist podcast that comes out every Tuesday, as well as our Level Up Artist membership that we open periodically throughout the year for new members. But from an art making standpoint, it's really this Sunrise series. And I am so excited to keep diving into it, especially because it is a larger scale series. So very like immersive experience type exhibition. Once they're going to be all shown together in March 2023, there'll be a large series of them, which I'm very excited about. But another new thing that I'm doing with this series too is, in addition to sharing on social media in my Instagram stories or LinkedIn or Facebook, wherever people want to connect with me, I also am sharing more behind the scenes on my newsletter. And so filming behind the scenes of concepts like some of like I shared here today, but also just in process, time-lapse videos, works in progress. So almost as if you were in the studio with me at any given point, like, hey, this piece is done. This is work in progress. I have no idea where this is going, but this is the idea I have for it. And really updating my newsletter subscribers to feel like they're part of the process as the series comes together. So if your listeners want to go ahead and join my mailing list, I send one out every week. The videos are going to come out probably every few weeks. So they can go ahead and subscribe on my website at jacquelinesanders.com/newsletter. It's a free sign up, takes 2 seconds, and just a colorful piece of inspiration to come into your inbox each week.
Oh, I love that. Those are my favorite types of videos. Like I love seeing the behind the scenes process and like just like how you tap into your creativity. I love it. So I cannot wait to see those. And I will, of course, include all of Jackie's information, her socials, her website, newsletter, all of that in the episode description. So you can simply click on that and kind of take a tour of what Jackie's got going on. You have a studio hours, right? Where folks can come and kind of check out your studio space. Is that right?
Yep. So I have a public facing studio at Art Space in downtown Raleigh. It's off of East Davie Street. So if listeners want to come by there, there's 3 different exhibition spaces as well as over 30 different artist residency spaces. So it's huge hallway where basically like you think of every room is a different artist studio. So an oil painter, a woodworker, a sculptor, a leather worker, geometric painter. It's like, if you bring friends, someone is bound to like something, which is so much fun. And so we have open hours throughout the week. Each artist has varying hours. Mine honestly do change a bit. So if you're ever looking to come to Art Space, definitely just send me a DM on Instagram. My handle is @JSandersStudio. Or you can come for the Art Space First Friday events, which is the first Friday of every single month. Almost all the artists are there. We typically open new exhibitions during that event. There's live music, typically like wine and cheese in some of the artist studios. So you can basically come into the artist studio, purchase completed works, as well as talk to the artists and really see the creative process in action, see the space where these spaces were made, or see where I've spent all my 4 a.m. days.
All of your early mornings. Oh, I
love
it. I'm definitely gonna have to come by for a First Friday because you can't go wrong with a First Friday. Honestly,
there's also so many other artists that don't have studios there too. Like I love talking to like other artists, especially if they've followed me on social media or if they listen to the podcast and like they instantly feel comfortable in my space, which is like, that's the biggest compliment for me. Like make yourself at home. Like you already know where I pour coffee, you know where things are. Like just come and hang out and talk about artwork. It's great.
Just being in a creative space. Like, I love it so much. Jackie, honestly, I cannot thank you enough for being on the podcast today. And I really do think we could like just talk about art for hours.
100%.
And I can't wait to have both you and Adriana on for a future episode, because I do think the business aspect of art is such an important conversation and is so useful to artists. So I cannot wait to have you both on to talk about that more. And thank you so much for sharing your story and your knowledge and what inspires you to make art.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me. It's been so much fun. And I love connecting with other artists as well. So I'm excited to talk to you again soon.
Yes, absolutely. And I want to thank the listeners for tuning in today. If you have questions or comments for me or for any of my guests, including Jackie, you can call or text us on our hotline, 252-419-6004. You can leave us a voice message and we will include your questions and our answers on a future episode of the podcast. You can also follow us on Instagram @WanderingCreativesPod, and be sure to like, rate, and review the Wandering Creatives podcast. And stay creative, folks. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to the Wandering Creatives podcast, a CEI media production. Please like, rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast as it helps us greatly. You can follow us on Instagram @WanderingCreativesPod and on Facebook @Wandering Creatives Podcast. If you would like to support the podcast, you can become a Patreon for just $5 a month. The link is in the episode description.